Welcome to the Power of Purity podcast, the show that empowers men to experience their sexual gift in a healthier way. Now here's your host, Tony Ingrassia.
Hey guys, what up? I'm glad that you're back with me today for the Power of Purity podcast, and this is part 6 of a series that I started several weeks ago entitled 10 Things That Every Man Should Know About His Wife When It Comes to Sex. And as the title suggests, there are 10 principles that every man needs to know, and we have now covered the first 5, which means we have 5 more to go, and we're going to continue, therefore, with Principle 6 today. But the first 5 principles that we've already covered are these. Number 1, your wife wants you to understand that healthy sex occurs within the context of a healthy relationship. Number 2, your wife wants to know that she's the focus of your sexual exclusivity. Number 3, your wife wants to know that during sex, you want her more than you want the sex itself. Principle 4, your wife wants you to understand that her sexual rhythm and appetite might be very different than yours. And number 5, your wife does not want to feel like every time you touch her or kiss her, it has to lead to sex. And with that being said, you guys, it therefore brings us to Principle 6 of the 10 things every man should know about his wife when it comes to sex. And Principle 6 is this. Your wife wants you to learn and utilize what she likes during sex. And guys, I think that this principle goes along with Principle 3 that we've already covered, which was this. Your wife wants to know that during sex, you want her more than you want the sex itself, or said another way, your wife does not want to be objectified by you. Your wife doesn't want to feel like you're just using her for the sake of your own orgasm, or maybe here's a good way to say it, your wife doesn't want to feel like you're just taking from her during sex, but she wants to feel like you're giving to her also when you have sex together, and that there's a mutuality involved in your sexual relationship, that there's 2 of you there, that it's a 2-way street. Or in the verbiage of the metaphor of the cartoon that I shared a couple episodes ago, that there's 2 of you there and that you're aware of your wife's presence and you're painting a portrait of your wife through your sexual experience with her. And that you're just as concerned that she experiences sexual pleasure and enjoyment as you are that you experience sexual pleasure and enjoyment. So in other words, your wife wants to know, and she wants to feel and to believe that her sexual experience and pleasure is a high priority to you and not something that you take for granted, and it's something that you're willing to take the time to get to know and to learn and to understand and to appreciate. And it might be kind of silly, I don't know, but I'm just thinking of a metaphor right now of the concept of language. And you know how learning a new language can be a very difficult thing to do, right? So if I ask you right now to speak to me in Chinese, you probably couldn't do it because you probably don't know the Chinese language, and therefore you can't speak the Chinese language. And if you wanted to learn the Chinese language, it would take a significant amount of time, energy, and effort on your behalf, not only to learn the language, but then also to become fluent in that language. So in this metaphor, imagine that your wife's body and your wife's sensuality and your wife's sexuality and your wife's sexual pleasure and eroticism was a kind of language, the language of your wife's body, or the sexual language of your wife's body. If this were true, would you be interested in learning this new language? Would you be willing to take the time energy and effort that it would require for you to learn this language and then to speak this language and then to become fluent in this language. So you could then metaphorically speak the language of your wife's body and then communicate to your wife and with your wife through the language of her body. In other words, not just you expecting your wife to understand and communicate with you through the language of your body and what you like and what feels good to you, but you learning to understand and communicate with your wife through the language of her body and what she likes and what feels good to her. And it's in view of this, you guys, that I don't think we should just assume that our wife necessarily likes any particular sexual activity or expression or position or experience just because we ourselves happen to like that particular sexual experience or expression. After all, there's probably a pretty good chance that you and your wife disagree about a lot of things, including what color to paint the kitchen, where to go on vacation this summer, where to go to dinner this weekend, how to put the silverware in the dishwasher, and how much money you should be saving versus spending. So why should you automatically assume that your wife necessarily agrees with you about different issues and ideas when it comes to sex, such as whether the lights should be on or off when you have sex, whether you should light candles and have background music, what position is the best position, or what feels the best during your lovemaking. And all I'm saying here, guys, is that I think it's incredibly important that we really try to understand our wife's preferences when it comes to sex and what she would prefer and what makes her feel good, and not just what we would prefer or what makes us feel good, because as this particular point states, principle number 6, your wife wants you to learn and utilize what she likes during sex. And by the way, guys, we're guys, right? And our wives are women. So therefore, how in the world could we possibly know what really feels good to a woman and what her preferences might be unless we really take the time to get to know our wives and discover and learn what they really like and prefer? And I might be wrong, but I'd bet the instinct and assumption of many men is that their wife must automatically like something because that's the way they would like that particular something to happen. Well, I like this speed, and I like this rhythm, so I just assume that's the speed and the rhythm that my wife must like also. Well, I like this much friction, so I just assume that's the friction my wife must like also. Well, that happens to be my favorite position, so I just assume that's my wife's favorite position too. Really, guys? What if it just so happens that your wife likes some things very different from the way you happen to like to do things? And if that were true, would you be interested in taking the time to really get to know the nuances of your wife's particular preferences and then serving your wife accordingly? And by the way, guys, it turns out that apparently what works for most women sexually is quite a bit different from what works for most men sexually. And, for example, did you know that an estimated 80% of women cannot climax through intercourse alone, and therefore they require some form of additional stimulation, such as a hand or a mouth or a sex toy, or fill in the blank, if they're ever going to achieve their orgasm. And the reason for that is because most women need direct clitoral stimulation to experience orgasm, which they don't get during intercourse because the clitoris is located outside the vagina and about an inch above it under the top junction of the vaginal lips, and therefore intercourse simply doesn't provide enough direct clitoral stimulation to allow most women to become aroused enough to have an orgasm. And that's very different from most guys, because most guys have no problem whatsoever achieving orgasm through intercourse alone. And while I was researching this topic a little bit, I found an article by Michael Castleman that was published in Psychology Today magazine entitled, "Why So Many Women Don't Have Orgasms." And the author references the three primary actions that occur between most couples during what he calls the erotic dance. And these three primary actions are, number one, vaginal intercourse, which is almost universal, which means it occurs almost 100% of the time that couples have sex. And number two is mutual genital hand massage, which means the wife is touching and massaging her husband's genitals during sex, and the husband is touching and massaging his wife's genitals during sex, which occurs around 75% of the time that couples have sex. And number three is oral sex, which the author suggests occurs around 25% of the time that couples have sex. But then the author goes on to reveal some interesting statistics concerning these three primary actions that occur between couples while having sex. And what's interesting is that for men, the rate of orgasm remains rather constant between 95 to 98% of the time, regardless of the combination in which any or all of these three actions are experienced by a man. Or said another way, a man's going to have an orgasm 95 to 98% of the time, regardless of whether he experiences just vaginal intercourse with his wife, or just genital hand massage, or just oral sex, or the application of any of these three actions in any particular combination. But what's really interesting is that for women, the rate of orgasm varies considerably based on the number of actions that are utilized while having sex with her husband. So that if just the first action is used, intercourse by itself, up to 50% of women report the ability to have an orgasm. But if two actions are used, including intercourse and hand massage, that number goes up to 71% of women who report the ability to have an orgasm. And if all three actions are used, including intercourse, hand massage, and oral sex, 86% of women report the ability to have an orgasm. And based upon these statistics, the author then concludes that for reproduction, sex is all about intercourse, but for pleasure, especially women's pleasure, it's about men providing all three actions. Or said another way, using my own words, it appears that most women need significantly more direct stimulation than that which is provided by intercourse alone in order to achieve orgasm. And what that tells me, guys, is that if we're really interested in pleasing our wives sexually, and interested in helping them experience and achieve a maximum amount of sexual pleasure and enjoyment, that we need to take the time to get to know our wife and to get to know her body and to figure out what feels really good to her and what works for her, and then to go above and beyond the call of duty to take our time and to care for her and to attend to her and to serve her accordingly. And I'm not sure, guys, but I'd bet that our willingness to serve our wife in this way will in fact accrue to the benefit and the health and the happiness, not just of our wife, but also of our marriage relationship and the sexual relationship, and maybe even the sexual frequency that exists between us. So in the verbiage of the old adage, maybe, a happy wife will contribute to a happy life. And just one final thought before we leave this point, and that is that one of the biggest mistakes a man can make when trying to please a woman is assuming that all women are stimulated in the same way. Because the fact is that every woman is different, and not every woman is going to respond to the same things in the same way. So a wise husband will not try to force his wife to have a sexual experience the way he thinks she should be having or enjoying said sexual experience, and will instead take the time to learn the unique language of his wife's body and then become fluent in that language and then serve and bless his wife accordingly. Because, as this point states, principle number 6 of the 10 principles, number 6, your wife wants you to learn and utilize what she likes during sex. And with that being said, it brings us now to the 7th principle of the 10 things every man should know about his wife when it comes to sex. And the 7th principle, guys, is this. Your wife wants to know that you're attracted to her and that she's desirable to you. And for this particular point, you guys, in the way of research, I actually was reading a book written by Shaunti Feldhahn, who was a guest that I interviewed on the Power of Purity podcast. And actually, Shaunti and her husband Jeff wrote this book entitled For Men Only. And so I'm going to read just a paragraph here from the introduction of Chapter 8, which is entitled The Girl in the Mirror. When we were writing the original edition of this book, our daughter was 5 years old and definitely at the daddy's girl stage. She could whack a pretty good line drive for her age, but she was happiest, I think, when she was dancing for me in a consignment store costume dress Shaunti had bought for her. It was pink and had a twirly skirt. Pink and twirly matters a lot when you're 5. I can still see her twirling around our living room, absolutely beaming with delight. Twirl left, pause, twirl right. Daddy, watch, she calls as she spins and the skirt does its thing. Daddy, look at me. Do you think I'm pretty? If you've ever had a little girl twirling around your house, you know what I was thinking right then. Lord, just let me hold on to this moment. Please don't let my little girl grow up. That's what this chapter is about, because you see, in a way, little girls never really do. Would it surprise you to know that your gifted, hard-working, secure, grown-up wife is still silently asking the same question? Do you think I'm pretty? Only now it's you watching. It's you she's asking. You who will decide her haunting question, am I beautiful? And even more important, am I beautiful to you? And then on the next page of the book, page 155, I'm going to read one other little short paragraph here. It says, on our survey, most women told us they had a deep need or desire to know that their husbands or boyfriends found them beautiful. And younger women were even more likely to have that need. Among women age 45 and younger, more than 3 out of 4 felt this need, 77%. With women 35 and younger, the percentage rose to 84%. So guys, the bottom line of what Shaunti and her husband Jeff are writing there in that book, I feel affirms very powerfully our 7th principle here, which is your wife wants to know that you're attracted to her and that she's desirable to you. And let me just say, guys, that I certainly do not claim to be an expert here, but I will say that this idea makes perfect sense to me. And in fact, I think it's essentially true, not just for women, but also for men. I mean, don't you think that basically everybody wants to feel good about themselves in general? and specifically wants to feel that their spouse is still attracted to them and finds them desirable. And I might be wrong, but I think this desire for women is rooted and hardwired, as Shanti and her husband Jeff are suggesting, that it's hardwired all the way back into their childhood, and that an innate longing in the heart of every little girl is the desire to be seen as beautiful, especially by their daddy, because at that point in their life, their daddy is the most important and most powerful man they know. And isn't it interesting that from a very early age, it's as if they intuitively know that I'm a girl and my daddy's a boy, and I want my daddy to see me as beautiful. And of course, I don't mean this in a weird, inappropriate, or incestuous way, but simply to acknowledge that little girls from a very early age long to be recognized as beautiful. And I'm not sure, but I think this is why they intuitively begin to practice and pursue feminine things from a very early age, such as playing with dolls and doing their hair and pretending to wear makeup and trying to walk around in their mom's high heels and dressing up like a little princess. And in fact, just for the fun of it, I did a little research on gender identity, and I learned that most children become conscious of the physical differences between boys and girls by the age of 2, and that they're able to easily label themselves as either a boy or a girl by the age of 3, and have a stable sense of gender identity by the age of 4, which means they're understanding the differences between the things that boys do versus the things that girls do. And let me just tell you guys that I've had a front row seat for this reality, because Sherry and I had 3 boys, so I'm not sure I ever knew or understood that much about little girls. But then God gave us 3 granddaughters, and holy cow, did I begin to see and learn the difference between little boys and little girls. And it was amazing to me to watch these little girls and to see how early their femininity blossomed, and to see how important it was for them to be seen as beautiful. So my wife has this amazing collection of little girl dress-up clothes that she's gathered, including all these dresses and these princess dresses and varieties of hats and little girl high heels and long white gloves and jewelry and necklaces and rings and bracelets with pretend diamonds and pearls and jewels and little princess tiaras and sets of colorful butterfly wings that they can strap on their backs to look like little princess butterflies, and on it goes. And for real, just the other day, one of the girls was over our house, and she wasn't there 5 minutes, and she immediately went upstairs to the playroom, and she emerges minutes later as a little princess butterfly, wearing her flowing blue princess dress and her high heels and her big hat and her yellow butterfly wings. And how did we intuitively respond to the sight of this little princess that had invaded our house? Of course, my wife and I oohed and ahed, and we declared with great fanfare our utter delight to have such a beautiful young princess in our very presence. And of course, all this to her great pleasure, as she soaked up the praises she no doubt fully intended to receive. So in view of this, you guys, let me ask you a question. Do you think the heart of your wife today is all that different from the little girl she used to be? Or said another way, do you think that maybe that little girl who longs to be seen as special and beautiful still lives somewhere on the inside of your wife today? Do you think your wife still longs to be seen as special and beautiful? Do you think your wife wants to know that you're still attracted to her and find her desirable? And I might be wrong, but if I'm a betting man, I'm betting that these longings still live deeply and powerfully in your wife's heart. So before I leave this particular principle, which is this, Principle 7, Your wife wants to know that you're attracted to her and that she's desirable to you. I'd like to share 3 final observations that I have that are complementary to this principle. And the first one is this. Number 1, I encourage you men to allow your wives to indulge their femininity. Or said another way, I encourage any woman listening to this to give yourself permission to indulge your femininity. And let me just say what I'm trying to say this way. I happen to think that I have a very beautiful wife. Her name is Sherry. And something I really appreciate about my wife and something I really respect about her is the way I observe her taking care of herself and the way I see her nurturing her own beauty and femininity. And I might be wrong about this, but I don't think I am. As Sherry and I have journeyed through our own healing process, I feel like I've watched my wife become more beautiful and more feminine and more comfortable in her own skin, and I'm not sure exactly how much money she tends to spend on herself doing the different things that she does to take care of herself. For example, she gets her hair done, she gets her nails done, she gets a manicure, she gets a pedicure, she buys makeup, she gets a massage once in a while, and she buys things for herself that make her beautiful. And she does all these different things. And to be honest, I suspect that I might be shocked if I knew how much she really spent on herself. But do you know what, guys? I don't care how much she spends on herself because I happen to think it's a very good investment and it's worth every single penny. And whatever it is that she's doing, I'm telling you, she's doing a really good job, and I really like it. And I feel incredibly blessed to be the direct recipient and beneficiary of her efforts. So what I'm saying is that I just suspect that it's really important for ladies to be able to indulge themselves and to pamper themselves and to spoil themselves and to give themselves permission to cultivate their own sense of beauty and femininity. So ladies, I encourage you to light candles and to take luxurious bubble baths and to get your hair done and to buy some new outfits and to get a facial and to get a professional massage and to get a manicure and a pedicure and to buy some new clothes and to buy some new shoes and to buy some new makeup and to get your face done and to listen to some of your favorite music and sip a bottle of wine and maybe take some long walks and maybe read a book and do anything else that you can do that will help you feel better about yourself and help your self-esteem and help you feel more beautiful and help you feel more feminine. Because I don't know for sure, but I suspect that virtually every woman listening to me right now has been so busy taking care of everything and everybody else in and around her life that they more than deserve to focus on taking care of themselves and spoiling themselves a little bit. And gentlemen, I encourage you to bless your wives accordingly and to allow them to indulge themselves and to spoil themselves as they pursue and cultivate a healthier relationship with themselves than maybe they've enjoyed for a long time. And of course, I recognize that many of the ideas I'm suggesting here, such as professional massage and getting your hair done and manicures and pedicures and shoes and clothes, that all this stuff can be pretty expensive. And I also recognize that most of us are constrained by the practical realities of our financial situation. But with that being said, I still think there's ways that you ladies can take care of yourselves and pamper yourselves and treat yourselves, even if it's on occasion, and that it's very important for you to do so and to make it the priority that it should be. And with that being said, it brings me to my second observation, which is this. Number 2, I encourage you ladies to accept the fact that your husband really is attracted to you. And I'm not exactly sure, but I suspect that many ladies often struggle with their own body image and their own self-image, and they're probably in the habit of beating themselves up and in the habit of telling themselves some very unflattering and horrible messages over and over again. And I was actually going to name a bunch of those terrible things right here that I suspect that many ladies might say to themselves. But I decided not to say those things because I figure you're already an expert in those horrible messages that you tell yourself. So the last thing you need me to do is to say the things to you that you have already been saying to yourself. But my point is this, and my suspicion is this, that because so many ladies feel so insecure about how they look and how they feel about themselves, that they can't accept the fact that they turn their husband on, or that their husband really finds them attractive and desirable. So therefore, they project their own attitude and viewpoint upon their husband, and they assume that because they don't feel good about themselves, that there's no way their husband could possibly find them attractive or desirable, when in fact their husband does indeed find them very attractive and desirable. So ladies, I just want to encourage you to give your husband the benefit of the doubt and accept the fact that he really does find you attractive and desirable, and that he really does get turned on by you, and that he really does want to be with you, and that you really do still have the ability to ring his bell. So ladies, please give yourself permission to accept and to believe and to respond to your husband's kindness and compliments and initiatives. And with that being said, it brings me to my third and final observation that I wanted to share with you before I leave this point, which is primarily for the guys, and it's this. Observation number 3. Wife-size sex will help your wife be more attractive and desirable to you. And guys, there's a couple different thoughts I'd like to share with you here. And one is a metaphor that I think I might have shared earlier in the context of the podcast at some point, and it's the metaphor of 100 pennies. So, in the way of review, a dollar bill has 100 pennies, right? So, imagine in this metaphor that your sexual gift is the equivalent of 100 pennies. And it's God's will, plan, and design that your wife should be the sole subject of all 100 of your pennies. But what so many men do is they take their pennies and they begin to spread them all over the place. So imagine this. There's a man who's looking at porn on a regular basis. So it's as if he's given 30 of his sexual pennies away to pornography. So that means he's only got 70 pennies left for his wife because he gave 30 away to porn. But then he masturbates on a regular basis apart from his wife, which is like giving away another 20 of his pennies. And then he's having this inappropriate emotional thing with a woman at work, so he flirts with her, and he says inappropriate things to her, and he thinks about her all the time, and he's filled with lust toward her, and he thinks about her when he masturbates, so he's given away another 20 of his pennies to this woman. And then he goes in some chat rooms on the internet on occasion and has these perverted cyber sex experiences, which is like giving away another 20 of his pennies. And then of all things, this man says something like this to himself. You know, I'm just not that attracted to my wife anymore. I don't know what it is, but she just doesn't look that good to me. And she's not that interesting, and she just doesn't seem that sexy, and she doesn't seem interested in sex, and she doesn't seem to enjoy sex when it does happen, so I'm just not that attracted to my wife. Well, dude, duh, is your brain really that thick? I don't know if If I should say that, can I say that on the podcast? I hope nobody's insulted. But has it ever occurred to you that maybe you're not that interested in your wife anymore because you've been giving away 90 of your pennies to everything and everyone else? So now you've only got 10 pennies left to devote to your wife. So is this really more about your wife, or is it really more about you? So imagine this. Just imagine that somehow circumstances came about that you and your wife were somehow stranded on a tropical desert island, like Gilligan's Island, and you had to live like Adam and Eve for years and years. So you could literally run around naked all day, and you had to eat coconuts and bananas and berries and fish every day. And there was no more porn, and no more lady at work, and no more cyber sex, and no more Sports Illustrated swimsuit editions, and no more R-rated movies, and no more billboards, and no more Victoria's Secrets. And therefore, all of a sudden, you got possession back of all 100 of your pennies, and the only object of your sexual interest and desire and passion became your wife once again. Do you realize that your wife would suddenly become more attractive and desirable to you? And I believe that this was God's original plan and design to begin with. And maybe God was pretty smart the way he set this thing up from the very beginning. That God would make one woman for one man, and he'd bring the two of them together, and they would enter a sexual alliance together, and they would each be the exclusive object of one another's love and desire and passion and interest and attention. And can you guys just imagine how we might see and experience our wives differently if we had never seen porn? If we had never ever had sex with any other person other than our wife, which means we would have never ever seen another naked woman, which means we would have never ever seen another pair of breasts or another vagina, and we would have never known the experience of sexual arousal or orgasm with any other thing or any other person other than our wife. Do you think, therefore, we might see our wife differently if she truly was the exclusive object of our sexual desire and expression? Do you think we might see our wife different if she truly was the sole expression of our sexual gift? And if you're not sure, let me just say that I believe that we would see and experience and desire our wife very differently if she truly was the exclusive focus of our sexuality. And thus, this final point that I'm sharing with you, point number 3, wife-size sex will help your wife be more attractive and desirable to you. So guys, I believe that as we become committed to God's will and plan and design for our sexuality, and as we bring our sexual gift under the authority of God, and as we therefore shrink the expression of our sexual gift back down to wife-size sex, or said another way, as we bring our 100 pennies back into the context of our marriage, that our wife will suddenly become more beautiful and gorgeous and delightful and luscious and delicious, and the darling girl in our heart and our eyes that God always intended her to be. And with that being said, you guys, I know that I am way, way, way overdue for this particular episode, but I was in the middle of this 7th principle, and I didn't want to interrupt it, so I pray that you'll forgive me for this episode being really long, but I hope the content was inspiring and encouraging and insightful and helpful, so I pray that it's been well worth the few extra minutes that you've invested to listen to this episode So we will continue next week, guys. We have 3 more principles to go. We've covered 7 now of the 10 things that every man should know about his wife when it comes to sex. So I'll look forward to seeing you back here next week, where we will continue with Principle 8. Until then, be blessed. Have an awesome week. Have an awesome day. And I'll look forward to seeing you then. God bless you.
Thanks for listening. Visit powerofpurity.org for more resources and information. And if this podcast has been helpful or encouraging, please invite a friend to listen. Until next time, remember, there's power in purity.